I'm Jen, and welcome to the first episode of Blockchain Banter, DeFi debates and hot takes. Really excited about this one. I think it's just going to be, oh, good. DeFi Cheetah was able to join. I think it's just going to be a really fun discussion. I think debates are probably one of the best ways for all of us to learn and see things from different angles and really ask some important questions and hopefully start, kind of maturing the space a little bit more as it evolves. So, DeFi Cheetah, so glad that you're able to make it. We have Joshua Baker, who is the CEO of Aori, and Dr. Mark Richardson, who is the project lead at Bancor and Carbon. Thank you guys for joining. I see some hot takes that are out there and some debatable topics. I don't know if any of our speakers have one that they would like to throw out there. Otherwise, I have obviously a few that I have seen and kind of collected over the last week that we've been kind of playing with this idea here. Okay, I'm going to start then. I think this was one that actually came up on a previous call of ours, and it was Stefan Loesch, who is the senior advisor to Bancor and Carbon, who had said that at the end of the day, DeFi may very well not be decentralized. And I think that kind of goes against what we would all hope to see. But I would love to hear what you guys think of this. At the end of the day, will will the space remain decentralized? Is it even decentralized now?
Yeah, I'll give people like the benefit of the doubt and say it is decentralized now. I mean, you could point out some things like AWS cloud instances, like all being, in one of like 5 jurisdictions, or most nodes are run on AWS instead of like Azure and Google Cloud and on home networks and things like that. But I think that's like a little bit besides the point. I think what these people are what people really care about in decentralization more even than nodes themselves is like the DeFi applications, or even the blockchains. So like things like Arbitrum and Optimism have been catching a lot of flack recently for not like using fraud proofs and having a centralized sequencer. um, I think I think it's kind of narrow-minded to have DeFi be, if you look at like decentralization as like a full spectrum, right? Like on one end there's like full on, authoritarianism to the extent of like, historical monarchies, and then on the other side there's like full on democracy like Athens. Um, I think it's naive to think we have to be one or the other, centralized or decentralized. I think there's, been it's been shown that there's a full spectrum of centralization and decentralization, and I think like historically in crypto, people have been trying to innovate on those poles. But I think what's going to be really interesting is like the next couple DeFi crypto waves are going to be hybrid protocols that integrate centralization and decentralization, in pretty unique ways, and like take advantage of what actually makes a blockchain good, for example, rather than trying to shoehorn in web 2 things or finance things in a way that blockchains simply just weren't built for. So yeah, I guess that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom to what Josh has just said, especially the part regarding sort of the spectrum of centralization and decentralization, and it's not necessarily that binary. There are some concepts somewhere in the middle, but I do think that that in a way the market and blockchain participants, despite what they say, their actions kind of demand centralization over time. I remember, right at the beginning of when DeFi was getting popular, like around about 3 years ago, Ethereum really did have this very strong decentralization narrative back when it was still a proof of work blockchain, and anyone really could spin up a mining rig and start mining the chain and contributing to it. Whereas today, the the way that the staking services have started to take over, and we know that the I think Lido has something like a 30% stake and is continuing to grow and dominate. I think Ethereum itself will actually become a fairly centralized blockchain. And maybe that's what it needs to do in order to remain competitive. I remember when Binance Smart Chain came online, and it was quite unapologetically a Binance centralized blockchain controlled exclusively by by Binance employees, and people didn't seem to mind. In fact, they preferred it because it was a cheaper, faster chain. And yeah, the same thing goes for layer twos, and the way that their sequences are completely centralized, and in a way that means the entire layer two is also centralized. Like we could argue that there are aspects to its like security infrastructure that borrows from Ethereum, and even though I am espousing that I think Ethereum is becoming increasingly centralized, at the moment it's still, I would say, sufficiently decentralized that it doesn't really matter. But having borrowing from the security of a sufficiently decentralized blockchain doesn't mean that your blockchain is itself decentralized. We've seen the same thing with let's call it layer 1.5, or adjacent chains, things like Polygon, where sort of block reorganizations have happened with some relative frequency, and yeah, it doesn't seem to bother anyone who is using these chains. And for the most part, it hasn't really had too much of an impact. Arbitrum's centralized sequencer, I think, has only been an issue for participants on that chain only once. And even then, it wasn't because of its centralized nature, but the fact that it was congested and wasn't processing transactions the way people expected it to be. So it's weird because I think the ethos behind cryptocurrency, beginning with Bitcoin, really was to have this kind of at least a decentralized currency. But I'm wondering if the application layer on smart contract blockchains, if that decentralization narrative even matters anymore. It's very, very difficult to find any cultural adherence to many of those principles anymore. I think that they very quickly died when people were searching for convenience and cost efficiency. And I think that as long as convenience and cost efficiency are things that people demand, then it will push the industry towards increasingly centralized systems. I think that's unavoidable.
Cheetah, do you have a take on this one? You're muted.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure. It was, at the end of the day, will the industry remain, or is it even at the moment decentralized?
You mean at the moment, if it is decentralized? I think of course not, because the industry is still at a very early stage, and to be really decentralized, you need a very long time to battle test the system and let the system to be mature, to develop a kind of SOP that tackle different kinds of scenarios. There are different types of so-called black swan events happening from time to time, which requires the different people with expertise to design a more advanced mechanism to tackle those issues in a decentralized manner in case those things happen again and again. So it's still a long way to decentralization, but I think sometimes not struggling to be fully decentralized allows protocols to have some leeway to guard against some terrorists some form of in some form of bad stuff happening, it may save a lot of the protocols, TVL or stuff. An example could be actually, I think recently most of us are paying attention to the curve issue, and I think the primary reason for the attack must be the Viper compilers older versions issue the reentrance part. So every one of us know that, but it's part. The loss cannot be controlled in a small amount, largely because of the more decentralized element, which include first the all the liquidity pools on curve are non-upgradable. So which means which is the primary reason why there are multiple versions of Viper contract of different liquidity pools, because for LPs it's very hard for them to move the liquidity from one pool to another with a more updated Viper version, because it takes them it troubles them to do so. So this is the first part. The second part is there is a lack of kind of emergency button to pause the protocol in case of this kind of exploit, so that what the curve team could only do is to try to be faster than the hackers to safeguard the money in the pool. But of course, it exposed the pools to a higher risk in the period of those kind of attacks. So I think those issues shows that before we can achieve a fully decentralized economy on chain, we need to really have a more mature system with ample of experience to guard against different types of this issue, or else it would be hard for the DeFi space to scale up at the first place. Yeah.
So you say before we can be fully decentralized, do you see us heading in that direction, or do you see it becoming more centralized?
I think we are actually becoming more decentralized, because we can take a very simple data to show that, which is the DeFi's presence compared to CeFi. I think this figure would be a very powerful stack that shows us the trend.
Okay, and then Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, so that argument, about the let's say the growth of DeFi compared to CeFi, like I get it. Like there's definitely, and this is coming back to something that Josh said, there's a pretty sharp distinction between the types of services that you get from CeFi and who's offering them, and the spectrum of availability in a blockchain context, or at least a public blockchain context. But I don't think that we should expect that the trend is going to be to greater decentralization over time. I've raised this, I think, in a number of different contexts, but it's almost a law of nature at this stage, that sort of that whatever you want to call it, energy, power, capital, resources, they always accumulate in fewer and fewer hands over time. Right, like our own solar system would have started out as just like a warm center with like massive dust clouds swirling around it in a very decentralized way, which eventually sort of clumped together over time. You can also have a look at the way that like heat is distributed in sort of like a resistor map, and where most of the current in a circuit will tend to congregate over time. Like there is a statistical trend in all natural systems, and I consider finance to be just an extension of a natural system that actually does obey Boltzmann mechanics and should become increasingly centralized, and we've seen that, right? I think that Bitcoin, for example, sure, when it started out on like sort of day one, it was extremely centralized because it was just Satoshi and a few of the friends from his you know, from his web farm that were mining it. But then it very rapidly decentralized, and so there were many miners, and no one really knew who they were. But then think about today, right? We're down to, I think, to something like 3 Bitcoin miners. Like the overwhelming majority of the Bitcoin chain is now mined by just 3 organizations. And I expect that, as competition between those 3 becomes more intense, that we'll eventually be down to 2, and then we'll be down to 1, right? It's just, the rule is extinction. And, as people force each other out, it should trend towards greater centralization. And I wonder if we're going to see a greater trend in Ethereum with regards to staking services, because that we already have a market dominator, and I expect that with the advantage that they have in their ability to function on either lower margins or to offer more attractive services, that they will eventually start to shoulder out or acquire other staking projects. And I think that we should expect that that the overall offering in DeFi should follow these same trends, ones that trend towards greater centralization rather than greater decentralization over time.
I have like one like black pill and one like white pill about this. That's like maybe to make people optimistic, and like maybe one warning in history that's pessimistic. So like actually, if you guys want to know what the first DAO was, like go look up something called the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and even before that there was one called you might have heard of it also. It's called the New York Stock Exchange. It's kind of funny if you look at their organizational structures. If these guys had access to Ethereum, this would have been a DEX like today. They basically had a group of brokers or traders who all agreed together collectively to not make each other pay any fees, and they agreed that they would all trade amongst themselves, and that they would open a non-profit corporation basically among themselves that they were all going to be equal partners in, to manage this new exchange. This was like a revolutionary idea at the time. The kind of warning in that is the New York Stock Exchange is now a public or private company. Same thing with the CME. They both converted over time from nonprofit, mutually beneficial corporations to to later IPOing. So there is some definite credible history backing up what Mark's saying. But I do think one kind of great point though, that like maybe my prediction in the future is it's not as much going to be like that all of crypto becomes centralized. It's going to be that the things that are not as good as centralized products, or the trade-off is not big enough, will become centralized products. So I think the things that will remain decentralized forever, that are effectively what are the most important things, are things like validation and I mean, you're seeing such a huge push now for validation diversity, and I think it's only improved over the last like 6 months or so, since Lido really hit like their monopoly and people kind of realized how easy it was to set up a liquid staking derivative. But I think you're going to see like more and more decentralization on things that blockchains actually can beat TradFi and Web2 in, and everything else will become like Web2 bolted onto it or TradFi bolted onto it. But I think that it will be such an order of magnitude better, with crypto backends and crypto, the parts of crypto that are better than anything that historically exists. Like I don't think anybody on Earth will tell you or could make an argument with a straight face that the settlement processes in TradFi are as good or better than the ones in crypto. I mean, if you trade stocks on a stock exchange, you would be if you're like the most valuable hedge fund on earth, you will be able to close your trade and actually get your stock delivered to you 3 business days later. I mean, like, it's unbelievable. I think there's just so many things that we should be focusing on that are decentralized that can absolutely crush anything in TradFi or in Web2, rather than trying to make, like, the nth, decentralized social media platform. Those are kind of like the things I think we should be focusing on. But yeah.
Yeah, to offer a silver lining as well. Um, we do also have precedent for the fact that the market can often demand the standard that they want, regardless of cost. So, the consumer decides. I've been trying to think of a really good example, and I've got one that I think is mediocre, so forgive me. But in Australia, when I was a teenager, there was this huge push from consumers to start buying free range eggs as opposed to battery farm eggs, because of the cruelty to the chickens, and it was speculated at the time that basically all of these free range farms, because of their higher overhead costs, would basically never be able to meet either the volumes, or the price point that consumers were expecting. But ironically, the consumers were so determined, that the free range aspect to the market was what they were the most interested in, that it didn't matter that the free range producers were charging, I think, something like, in the beginning it was really high. It was like a 65% markup, compared to the battery farms, but they continued to outsell them. And in order to compete, the battery farms ended up having to close down some of their battery operations and seek, with this free range certification. So this is an example of when consumers kind of rally together and demand, demand. Let's say, let's call it ethical or moral standards, and are happy to pay for it, then competitors will always make choices that will move towards whatever the market is deciding on. So we do, like I said, it's a mediocre example, but I think it's kind of it touches on the right points, because it's something that I think that, like I said, is either ethically or morally motivated by consumers, and that paying a slightly more for an egg was not sufficient to destroy that overall change in the marketplace. So yeah, it is something that can and does happen. It's just a question I still have as to whether or not DeFi will achieve it. Maybe it will. I think there's still enough people around that do care about things like decentralization. So we'll wait and see. I remain hopeful, but I'm also a pragmatist and a realist. So I'm trying to call the state of the industry as I see it, and I won't be too surprised if people continue to demand cheaper, faster blockchains at the expense of decentralization, but we'll see.
Okay, let's move on. I saw a comment from someone recently who said, if we want to get out of the Wild West, then DeFi cannot remain anonymous. I know that, it's torn. I know a lot of people love the fact that you can remain anonymous. They want to, security reasons, and others are saying this is just not feasible long term for DeFi. Developers, they shouldn't. Go ahead, Josh. You unmuted.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you if you were finished.
No, go ahead. I mean, you got the gist of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
can we remain anonymous?
Well, this is I think, like, you're gonna start to see, just like you see on the internet, um, communities, right? So I highly expect you to start seeing walled gardens of KYC'd addresses, basically stored in off-chain databases with settlement on-chain. So, like, when people say, like, compete with TradFi, like, I mean, I would incredibly like welcome a future where like, you know, Ethereum addresses are being stored in cold storage at BNY Mellon, and every address owner has to KYC and open an account with BNY Mellon if you want to get access to walled garden finance. Like, I think you're going to start to see how, just like how we have an American internet and there's a European internet and there's a Russian internet and there's a Chinese internet, I think you're going to see like, you know, different like bubbles in essence of you know, crypto activity. I think like Coinbase is kind of trying to step in this direction a little bit with Base. This is kind of like getting back to what I was saying a second ago about like, you know, trying to keep everything that blockchains are really good at like at the forefront, and then let Web2 TradFi like have the like just integrate in the things that they do better as well. And so yeah, that's kind of like exactly what I think will happen. But I think that's a good thing because it's like it inevitably still leads to more growth in true DeFi. Like I don't think true DeFi can ever go anywhere. I mean, simply because it is immutable and uncensorable. And so the more you have these walled gardens, the more you're able to see kind of, you know, stragglers start to wander out of the walled garden and into, you know, the forest or into the dark forest, for the metaphor to Ethereum. So, yeah.
I think this is also another one of those examples where there's a clear trade-off. We know that, for example, anonymity in a way is preferable from maybe a security perspective, because it means that you know, if someone creates something of great influence, then if there is a nefarious group or even a corrupt government that knows who is responsible for the creation or the maintenance of that system, it's very easy for them to identify them and then, you know, gain leverage over them, and then, you know, either manipulate or destroy or, you know, meddle with, interfere with that system. So anonymity does expose systems, I think, to some level of like centralized failure, or like, you know, it creates a single point of failure. But at the same time, the anonymity culture, I think it's very, hopefully this isn't a controversial statement, has also fostered a, you know, this paradigm of being free from consequences. You know, I think it was just on a call yesterday that that I had with Jen on these Twitter Spaces, where we were discussing all of the new rug pull scams that are being created on Base. You know, basically the day that it launched, the week that it launched. And in a way, I think being able to hide behind anonymity is one of the, you know, that's one of sort of the founding like protections that people feel from each other. So being anonymous and being, you know, free from consequences is precisely the thing that allows people that would otherwise, you know, left to their own devices, do bad things, will allow them to do bad things at scale. Whereas people who want to do something legitimate, it puts them in an awkward position where people that, you know, would otherwise do bad things might identify them and single them out and try and manipulate or influence or corrupt them. So it's you know, it's not clearly. I don't see any clear advantages one way or the other. It's like one of those, you know, triangles where you can choose any 2 points, but at the sacrifice of the third one. I think that, you know, ideally, the best case scenario is that we do have a lot of anonymous developers and anonymous projects who are a force for good. But I think that they are generally few and far between, and the again, just sort of reading the state of the industry as it is, it tends to be the you know, the doxed developers and doxed projects that seem to be clearly the ones that are aligned with creating something that people are interested in using. And by and large, the anonymous projects are the ones that seem a little bit more dangerous. But having said that, I think Bitcoin is the original anon project, and so far so good, right? It seems to be doing okay. And that's not to say that Bitcoin hasn't been used for nefarious purposes, but I don't think that the original developers of Bitcoin were themselves nefarious. So yeah, it's another another very sort of gray, fuzzy area where it's difficult to develop a really informed opinion on it. But yeah, I am personally more comfortable using products from doxed developers who I can talk to, and who I can who I can be certain are not a part of a terrorist organization or something else. Whereas with add-on projects, you can never really be so sure. And I refer everyone back to the calls that we used to have with Rug Doctor, and the overwhelming presence of, for example, state-sponsored North Korean developers in the anon project space. And while the chances are just that high that I might be interacting with a protocol that is controlled by the North Korean government, under the guise of being an anonymous project, is just something that I'm not personally prepared to do. But maybe that just won't be a consideration in the future. But I don't see it happening until the distant future.
Cheetah, do you want to speak to this one?
For this one, actually, very much I agree with. Yeah, I think I don't have any particular point to add regarding what Mark and Josh said about this.
That's okay. I have one that I know you will want to add to. And this is AMMs and order books, right? We had spoken about this on a previous call, and something that you said, I think really kind of stuck with me. And that was that order books really can't be achievable on chain. Now, I'm rephrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Actually, I don't think it is not achievable. I think actually regarding this part, uh, I would like to add a few points that I previously have not mentioned. Like, actually, I think they may be achievable in the future, because I think there would still be a lot of problems to solve. But I think what really can be would be if project adopt the order book model, it can't be really that's decentralized, because it is not about the smart contract stuff or whatever. It is about not many people could have the expertise to process the order book. So it must be those who have the expertise to do so. That means there would be only a small bunch of people could be able to do that. So that also means the order book protocol, on-chain order book protocol, would rely on those small bunch of people to make the market. So this is first thing. The second thing would be, I think there could be coexistence of these two different kind of trading systems, and the positioning of AMM actually rely on two stuff. I think the first one would be the composability. So in order book, each order doesn't read the accumulation of the amount of capital of each order doesn't mean there is that much capital, because they can market makers could withdraw the order if some are filled. So this is the thing. But for AMM, the TVL is really the capital that is in a particular pool. So that makes the composability possible. For example, like you can make the market at the same time to be collateralized, to take some leverage, etc. That is something that order book cannot do. But I think they have different positioning for this for a part that for AMM is more much more friendly for I think it is the way for permissionless listing. So if you're saying, for example, I don't think any central exchange would allow any permissionless listing, and the reason is because they need to market makers had the cost of make the market, and if some of them are shit coins or whatever, it would cause loss to those market makers. So permissionless lending is quite unlikely, and if there is no market maker to do so, those who like to launch the project on order book is very hard to do the stuff at the beginning. But for AMM, I think this is actually the mechanism that is designed um, previously for the main purpose of doing the permissionless lending. For example, like if you are a new project, you don't have the initial reputation or the trust from the crowd, what you would need to do is to make use of the token incentive to bootstrap the liquidity, and those with a high risk profile will may like to provide the liquidity because of the token incentive. Uh, so the AMM design actually allows those with a higher risk profile to provide the liquidity and include more people to join the game. So I think they could coexist, but they bear different functions. And I think for Audible, some may choose efficiency and would and don't mind the protocol to be relying on a few professional market makers, etc. So there may be those protocols trading mainly like Bitcoin or Ethereum, those blue chips tokens, whatever. But I think what really makes DeFi different would be the kind of composability. So this is my take, and I hope I answered this well. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. It depends. So the kind of stuff that DeFi Tutor is talking about, I think, is kind of speaking to this idea that there is one correct way for a market to function, and that if you can't achieve that, that ambition, then you've effectively failed. And I sort of reject that idea. It's true that the efficiency of the market and the ability of market makers to interact is always going to be, it's going to be very one-sided. But and I apologize again if people are getting bored of me sort of referring to it. But eBay in a way is a pretty decentralized order book. Sure, like the actual product itself is highly centralized. It's a single centralized company, but the actual marketplace inside eBay is highly decentralized. And people can come in and put up any price that they want, and participants who want to buy those goods or services in some cases are free to elect for themselves whether or not they want to buy that thing at that certain price point. They can even, participate in a true auction with each other in order to determine a price point. And I think that is a totally legitimate way for a market to function. The question is, are conventional financial instruments prepared for a market that can be that lumpy, right, or that illiquid in some cases? I think that the type of order book behavior that we've come to sort of expect, or that we've been raised on since the 1980s, it's mostly to support things like debt. So that you can, so that people that are, for example, in leveraged positions can very easily, get in and out of those positions, and so that debt can be correctly calculated, and the value of collateral and other things can be appropriately evaluated. But if you're happy to recognize that a lot of that stability is illusionary, right? That it is, at some at some point arbitrary or artificial, then I think an order book system is completely achievable. I would even argue that it's been achieved. Both Josh and myself are leading projects that are trying to bring that kind of market democracy to chain, and we have. I think the model that Aori is using to allow for the pricing of options is based on the OpenSea marketplace model, which is how people have been exchanging NFTs with each other for a long time. And that, despite the market manipulation problems, the OpenSea model itself is actually very, very good. And I think that the system that we have with Carbon, where people can choose exactly the price points that they want to exchange their tokens with the market at, is still, it serves exactly that purpose of an on-chain order book, and it does it just fine. Right, it's what like the system is up and running, and it works delightfully well. Without having to have anyone come in and make the market. And the reason why I think that is true, or the reason why it's sustainable and can work in exactly the way that I've advertised it here, is because both of our projects sort of exist as a part of a continuum where the entire chain is going to be short. Like, liquidity is going to be lumpy, and that's fine. But because there is such a spectrum of different users using different protocols in different ways, there will always be this kind of abstract market that sits right over the top of it. And that, sure, there will be inefficiencies that lead to opportunities. We've seen, arbitrage systems have become, I think, some of the more prominent and profitable aspects to MEV over the years, and that's totally fine. But yeah, it's I just wanted to sort of push back a little bit and say that, if you have a very, very strict definition for the types of behavior, or that there is like a prescribed behavior that defines what an efficient order book can and should look like, then yeah, maybe it's not achievable on chain. But if you relax that condition and realize that you might not even have it in an off-chain system, and that the sort of the mirage that we all sort of collectively have to abide by is not as valid as you might think it is, then I would argue that it's very, very easy to achieve these things on chain. And in a way, the order book systems that you can probably achieve on chain are even more reliable than the ones that you can achieve off chain, because they are more difficult to manipulate. Just like what DeFi Cheetah was saying, when you are interacting with an off-chain order book, market makers generally will front run transactions in a way such that their liquidity is being redistributed all the time. One of the conversations that I've had so many times over the last year in preparing for the launch of Carbon is that a lot of the centralized market makers that we were interviewing prefer to spam an off-chain order book with hundreds of millions, if not billions or trillions of transactions every day, because they move their prices after every single interaction with the book. And that is that kind of illusionary stability that I'm referring to, right? Just because you can see an order book and interrogate its contents, because the makers in that system are always going to be faster than you and have better technology than you, then it's worth questioning whether that liquidity actually means anything. Sure, like it means something, but is it, does it justify the level of confidence that people have in these systems? I argue no. And having something that is a little bit more matter of fact, there might actually be some advantages to. but yeah, it's a different perspective. It requires a slightly more nuanced view of what a functioning marketplace should look like, or whether or not one that has discontinuous liquidity is considered dysfunctional. I don't think that that's something that I'm willing to concede. I think that many marketplaces, things like used cars, produce, real estate, very, very lumpy, not a huge amount of market making happening in it, and more or less doesn't seem to be any worse off because of it.
Cheetah or Josh?
No, I was just say, yeah, I think I totally agree with Mark. I think like AMMs come from an inherent desire to create liquidity in an illiquid market. That was kind of the entire original take. Was even the centralized exchange markets when they launched these AMMs initially, like with UniV1, were super illiquid. And so AMMs were seen as a way of like kind of exactly what Cheetah said, where when the price moves, Uniswap is effectively synthetically creating a continuous stream of limit orders below the new price, right? So there's never this lag between like the price moves and the book is empty on an AMM, but that kind of comes with trade-offs, and it kind of comes with the trade-offs of, number one, you're forcing the makers, in this case the liquidity providers, to take on unnecessary risk and provide stale price quotes. But at the same time, you're kind of like offloading. Like, you can never get rid of the problem in order books and in TradFi of latency, like Mark was describing. Like the what I mean by that is, like, you guys have all probably heard the stories of like HFT firms buying real estate next to stock exchanges for like hundreds of millions of dollars for like pieces of crap, just so that they could put their server farms a little bit closer, to save a nanosecond. Um, that's totally real. That happened. And you're seeing the same thing happen in crypto right now, whether you know it or not, even on Uniswap. So, like, for example, whenever you actually submit a transaction, it sits in the mempool, but there have to be block builders who build that block and then settle that and put it on chain. And some of those block builders are HFT firms. And so if you go like look up there's a new research firm called SMG. I'd highly recommend checking out their thread on latency and blocks, because what you're finding right now is pretty much any block where there's like volatility and price movement, like or there's like high vol for a block. Every HFT firm and their mother is like bidding up this block in the last like 50 milliseconds of time to submit a block transaction. Like, it's all a race every 12 seconds to submit a block building proposal. So that they can create the most profitable Sexdex ARBs they possibly can. Like, all we've done is like abstract it out and make it a little bit more complicated, so that only like two firms can do this, rather than like in TradFi every single firm, with things like colocation and whatnot. So I think like in a vacuum, yes, like I love AMMs. I wish like in a vacuum, like there were no order books, there were no centralized exchanges. I think the communist AMM utopia could be achieved, but um, I'm afraid we live in a world with evil firms that like to trade very fast. So yeah, that's my take on it.
I have something to add. Actually, I think we can take the recent curve scenario to demonstrate how powerful AMM could actually be, which order book could not solve the issue. For example, I guess some of us may have paid attention to the fact that yesterday, Curve founder Michael pulled out of his own pocket to permissionlessly create a pool on Curve and incentivize the pool with his Curve's own stablecoin pairing with the book that position on Freshland against CRE as the collateral. So basically, it demonstrates how efficient AMM could bootstrap the liquidity of a originally quite illiquid market in a very efficient manner. Like within 12 hours, it achieved more than 6 million TVL. to enlarge the spectrum of those with a higher risk profile to take the risk and then to provide the liquidity. So this is something that order book actually very hard to do. And I think, as I said, both systems could coexist with different purpose, because I think for AMM, this would be a kind of things that they could do, because I think it's quite different. Like if you purely seek for trading purpose, whatever, of course, like traditional order book would be a more efficient way to do so. But as we all know, at least in my opinion, uh, the why Web3 is so meaningful is that it is the first time human beings could issue its kind of asset on chain in a non-custodial and decentralized way, and in a permissionless manner. So what that means is that previously, in terms of whatever digital asset, whatever, those things are actually issued by the government, and no one will give a shit on the things that we issue. And because of AMM, we could use the token incentive to kind of make the things that any one of us issue could be something that is of real value because of the liquidity that is present on chain. So I think this is something that is quite different. I would say they have different positioning. I mean, the Audible and AMM had different positioning in this regard, and AMM is trying to kind of allowing people to lower the threshold of people to issuing its own token and get the liquidity in a very short period of time, instead of relying on market makers to make the market whatever. I think this is the positioning of AMM, which is quite different from Audible. I think Audible is for mature assets to be traded in a very efficient way. So I think both things are quite different. And after my contemplation, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And actually, I welcome both systems to coexist in the space to serve different purposes.
I definitely like. Yeah, I think they will coexist. I just think they can't coexist on the same market, right? Like, because you inevitably run into scenarios where order books are inherently vampiric on AMMs, just simply because of stale price arbitrage. So, like, we're causing IL or causing LVR, or causing just LPs to lose money, basically. So, like, but I definitely agree. Like, I think there's a lot of like. I definitely agree with what you were saying. I think Curve is maybe like a weird example just because of all the crazy shit going on right now in the market. But I definitely agree with the premise though of like AMMs are the best for low liquidity new markets where you don't have sophisticated trading players incentivized properly yet via things like arbitrage or market making profiting off the spread of a trade. It definitely makes sense to start on an AMM, and I 100% support AMMs for new markets. And I think like eventually what will happen is AMMs or some kind of new on-chain trading primitive will be the starting place for new markets, and then as they scale, the thing most optimized for liquid markets is clearly an order book. Like there's 200 years of history showing that, and so I think that's where like the more liquid markets will go. But yeah, definitely agree with what Cheetah said. Yeah.
We have about 3 minutes before we're at the hour. So if anybody wants to add their last comments, Mark, I don't know if you have a comment that you want to add there.
Maybe just one point of nuance, and it's a little bit navel gazy, but in the sense that there is like something called a stale price is interesting. The what Josh is referring to is like is unequivocally true. The fact that there is this kind of lag time, or the block speed limits how fast a a market participant can interact with, for example, an AMM, and the fact that there would always be an opportunity for an order book to sort of provide the counter trade to to a stale AMM price, and allow an arbitrager to sort of profit from that difference. There's like, that's absolutely true, and I would never contest that. But go through this thought experiment with me for just a second. Imagine that we were able to improve the block speed on Ethereum down to like a second, and then like a millisecond, and then a nanosecond, and then picosecond, femtosecond. Like, it really doesn't matter. The question is, how would that actually impact the result of the marketplace overall at the end of, let's say, a minute? Because I guess the lemma that I would like to posit is that it makes no difference. The fact that we can actually observe that time lag and see these opportunities get kind of closed is something that we can point to and go, oh, look, what's happened here. But the reality is, even if you were to divide it and kind of integrate it over an infinite number of seconds, and assume that the market is constantly interacting with that position continuously over that period, it doesn't actually change the financial outcome for anyone in that system. And this way of thinking about market lag time has really sort of completely changed the way that I feel about arbitrage in general. And then, at an even more abstract level, you could argue that the only reason that anyone has ever bought or sold anything is because of a lag time between whatever instrument or device that they're using to interact with the market and their own sort of internal barometer on what something is worth, right? The reason why someone might, buy, I don't know, a house, for example, is because they're arbitraging it against their own internal valuation of that asset. There is a layer above all of these instruments that we've created, where only like an omniscient being would actually know what the real quote unquote true market price is for something. And if we were to, let's say that we were to get to, some level of, I don't know, predictive statistical technology that would actually know precisely the price of a thing, meaning the thing that the market, whatever that amalgam even looks like, would value an asset at, and always price it at exactly that point, no one would ever trade, ever. Right, because there would never be any motivation for anyone to buy something at a price that's exactly equal to what they think it's worth. They're always buying something because they see an opportunity in it, and that's just something that is, it's not an argument against, like, I'm not challenging anything that Josh has said. I'm just saying that if you take these things to their kind of natural, if you let them play out in any version of an efficient system that you can imagine, these problems, or these problems don't go away, which begins to beg the question: are they problems at all? And so, yeah, it depends on your view. And I think it has a lot to do with my sort of background in thermodynamics and chemistry and, and physics and things. But I tend to view financial markets as being something like a state machine, or as a state function, maybe. And the reason why things happen at all is because there is a gradient, either of expectation or of value. And so, yeah, it's just a very, very high level talking point. I'm not necessarily sure exactly what my argument is, but just something to consider, that I think sometimes we get way too down in the weeds, and we start to forget that, that seeing the forest from the trees is something that absolutely is relevant to our analysis of not just DeFi, but of all of finance.
Thanks so much, Mark. Josh sent me a message. He apologized. He had to drop. Cheetah, you unmuted. You want to add something?
Actually, it's not. I think I agree, and I just want to add some comment about the quality of the discussion. Like, actually, I like this kind of philosophical level of debate because it kind of makes me to rethink the things that we believe by challenging our belief with others' different opinions, so that we could potentially form some really more foundational and a philosophical way as to why this is the case. I think this is very important because at a very early stage of the new market, it is very important to have this kind of. I think this would be a kind of what Elon Musk said, first principles thinking, like. Yeah, so that's why I think I enjoy this kind of discussion because every time, because originally I don't think of very some very good, at least I know the reasons for the existence of AMM, but the debate with you guys make me kind of distill the points and make it in a more finest form. So I think yeah, this is something that I would like to add, just some random expression of the quality of the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that. And I just want to thank you again for joining us. I know Josh had to drop, but I want to thank him as well. Mark, thank you so much for being here. I definitely look forward to next Wednesday. We're going to continue doing this. Cheetah, you'll be back with us. Mark, I know you'll be there. Josh said he'll be joining us as well. And I just want to remind any of the listeners also, if there is something that you'd like to hear us discussing up here, please don't hesitate to DM me or to put your hand up and to join us up on the stage. I encourage it, not just welcome it, I encourage it. So thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, I look forward to next week. We have another blockchain banter tomorrow. We spoke about Oracle list protocols last week. We're going to be speaking about OEV. Which we really didn't have a chance to dive into. It's Oracle extractable value. It's a kind of a subset of MEV, and really looking forward to that. Hope everybody can join us. It's going to be at 10 a.m. UTC tomorrow, so slightly earlier than today. Hoping you all can join. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the host, and thank you for the audience. Yeah, so see you next time.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone.